Today I have selected a topic which is called computers in predicting the materials behavior. I will try to speak as slow as possible and I will try to keep it as high level as possible because I know many of you are not coming from materials background, so you don't need to worry if you don't understand the terms and technical stuff which I'm mentioning, but try to understand the whole process and also the appreciation of using mathematics and computer science. As a research portfolio, you can see we work on many different things. We work a lot with a lot of industries. Some of them are mentioned here. We work on many different types of processes. So again, if you are familiar with forming, which you will hear a lot today, then we work on this in this area, as well as subtractive manufacturing, additive manufacturing, design, pipeline design, for example, etc. So we work on many different areas. From the physics part of the things, we work on microstructure. What is the role of microstructure in material deformation, for example? What is the impact of environment, defects? During the manufacturing, you have a lot of residual stresses, so how we can understand that and predict that. From materials perspective, again, if you look around yourself, look at your car, motorbike, whatever, so you see a lot of parts made up of metals. So we work on different types of metallic materials like aluminum, titanium, niobium, steels, nickel-based superalloys, etc. We also have done some work on soft biological tissues, composites, and ceramics as well. We work a lot with academia as well as industries, and these are some of our collaborators which have been collaborating with us for the last 10 years or so. What I'm going to do today, I have already started with the introductions. I will discuss about the metal deformation and failure mechanisms. Again, I will be saying a lot of technical stuff, but you can ignore me and don't start cursing me that what this crazy guy is talking about. Just try to understand the overall process, how the whole thing really works. And the appreciation of mathematics and computers in modeling these kind of responses is very important. So then I will speak about computational manufacturing. So whatever manufacturing they do in the real life, we try to replicate that in the computer. That's what we do in my group. So from that context, I'm going to speak about sheet metal forming. Then I will give you some case studies and then summarize everything. So hopefully it will be quick and I don't have to really face, at least I can't face right now, but I don't have to see those faces, angry faces after the presentation. So when I talk about computers and predicting the materials behavior, then we have three different areas. One is you are working in an industry which manufactures the material. For example, steel mills. So they develop or manufacture steels for us. So in that case, you have to really understand the alloying and all these kind of stuff, that if I add something in my material, what's going to happen to its properties. So that's part of the materials manufacturing. So people work in this area and develop and do the experimental and computational studies in this area. Then the second area is materials and during manufacturing. So for example, if you look at your car, you have a car bonnet, car door, car roof. These are all made up of metallic sheet metals, right? So you have a flat sheet and you use a die to form it in a specific shape, as you see here in this animation. So during the manufacturing, again, you have to see how your material is going to behave and you can really manufacture a part or not. So again, we develop computational models for that. And lastly, in-service material performance. So once you have manufactured the component and it's already in the car, then how it's going to perform during the operations. So we also understand on that. For example, if it's exposed to a harsh environment, it's having corrosion like rust in normal cases, then it degrades and it can fail earlier. So we basically try to predict that kind of fracture or in-service materials performance as well. So these are the areas you can classify when you talk about computers in predicting materials behavior. From my research group's perspective, we work in these two areas. So we work in the materials during manufacturing and also in-service materials performance. We don't work in this area, but we collaborate with other researchers around the world to do work for us in this area. And then we do work for them in our area as well. So this is how it works in the academia and industry. So let's move towards the more technical side of the thing. So firstly, let's see what I meant by metal deformation and failure mechanisms. What it really means. So if you look at a metal, then again, you see there are so many mechanisms I have mentioned here. And since you are all coming from computer science background, you might not have a knowledge on mechanics of material. So don't really worry about it. Just count them. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You have almost 10 mechanisms here. and there are many more which I haven't mentioned here. So your material can have any combination of these mechanisms during deformation, right? So when you are forming a part or when you are using a material for any application, it can have any combination of these mechanisms which can play a role in its performance or during manufacturing. So we basically try to identify those mechanisms for the materials, and then we try to develop computational frameworks for those kind of materials. Okay, so these are some of the examples like damage and failure in metals, stress corrosion cracking if your steel is exposed in seawater, for example, or in acidic environment, or in any other kind of corrosive environment, then how it's going to behave. Interface failures, where when you have welds and other things bonding, then you can have interface failures, how they behave. Additive manufacturing, whether it's ultrasonic based or whether it's selective laser melting. So we do computational modeling for that, and also metal forming. So you can see there's a wide variety of processes, and then there is a wide variety of materials, and each material is different. So you can have any combination of these mechanisms. Again, forget about what these mechanisms really mean, but just count them that they are 10, and we need to find out for each case which material is active. So then we say, okay, we understand now, we are an expert in the area of metals now after one slide, and we say, okay, we understand the metal deformation and failure mechanism, but if I am given a material and I say I want to form it using a sheet metal forming process, then how I'm going to do it? So the first thing I would ask is, what is sheet metal forming? Because I'm not an expert, right? So sheet metal forming process, as I give you an example before, you will have a sheet of metal which is flat, and then you make a die or use a die to form it into a specific shape. Again, the examples are a spoon, a plate in your kitchen, a car door, or your bonnet of your car, aerospace structures. A lot of them are made up of sheet metal forming. So you can use, again, there are different varieties of processes which I have shown here, which might be out of scope for you guys, but this is how it works. So you have a die and you form a flat sheet into a specific shape. When you form it, so you can imagine if you have a paper right now in your hands and you use your hand to form it in a shape, you will see it. You cannot form it because it's not ductile, right? You will tear it after a certain amount of pushing in your hand into the paper. While in the case of metal, you again have to see the same, that how far you can deform it before you will have a crack in your metal, because you need to make a successful part in real life. And to do that, you need to understand the behavior of that material in the lab. So what you will do is, if it works, so what we do is we understand the behavior of the material, which can be a combination of many mechanisms. Some of them I showed you in the previous slide. We transform these mechanisms after experimental studies into a number of equations, which are again inspired from mechanics of materials, and then we implement them in a computer and make a program which will run a real life test case for us. So for example, in this case, we are trying to study how a microstructure of a material behaves during sheet metal forming, and how the cracking will occur after a certain amount of deformation. In this case, we are looking at void growths or ductile damage in polycrystalline materials, again under different types of loading. And this is the experimental case. So we can do the same. We can take the same material into the lab and we can do the testing. So this is the actual material. We are using cameras to image the strains which are induced in the material, and we are measuring it. So these color basically means strains, right? And we can do the simulation using the same. So these are the models now. So you see our models can capture very much what we see in the experiments. And again, just based on this, that we understand the mechanics, we construct the equations, we implement them in a computer and run the simulations. Okay, so that's what we do from the context of metal forming processes. Once we have these models, what is the advantage of doing that? I mean, why I'm doing all this thing? This is the first question I will ask. And obviously the main advantage is if I am given a new material, and if I want to really form, if somebody comes to you and say, okay, this is your new material, can you make 10 car bonnets for me of this shape? They give you a drawing. So you will say, okay, what material is this? Can I form it or not? So you will take it to the lab, you will make a die, then you will form it, and you will see if it's failing or not. If it's failing, then you might have to modify the geometry of the component. You might need to change the material, or you might need to change the die design. So again, for all these things, you need to do a lot of iterations. A lot of material is gone, a lot of cost is involved, a lot of labor is there as well. So to avoid that, what you can do, you can use these type of modeling, and you can do all the virtual tests in the computer, and you can save a lot of money by doing so. And that's what we do in my research group, that we develop these kind of tools. Okay, so you now have an idea what we do. We basically try to understand the mechanics of the problem and then transform that into a program in a computer that really do a virtual simulation of that manufacturing process. So now let's say if somebody comes to me and say, okay, this is a high strength aluminum alloy, and can you basically form a certain part of it? Then I will go back to this basic diagram and I will say, okay, how many mechanisms I have? I have 10 mechanisms. So then I have to ask, okay, what is the deformation mechanism for this material? Because I don't know what this material is. It's a new material. Somebody manufactured it. What sort of microstructure and its effect is there in the deformation and failure? So is there any effect of microstructure, or should I ignore it for the time being? Again, it depends on the industry. If you're working with big industries, they might not be interested in. So you can look at macro scale, like the scale which is on the millimeters or higher resolution, and you can work with that. But if they're interested in that kind of phenomena, then you have to look at microstructure and its effect on the deformation and failure as well. And then also how it fails, because you are applying a severe deformation in the material. So after a certain amount of time, it's gonna fail, right? So you need to find those limits as well for that material. So what you will do, so it's kind of a very complicated puzzle. So it's not easy to solve. It could be a 10-piece puzzle depending on the number of mechanisms. It could be a 30-piece puzzle. It could be a 1,000-piece puzzle as well. So you need to really find out, okay, how I'm gonna really sort this problem out. So the first thing I will do is I will take the material to the lab if there is no data available, and I will do some basic standard tests, right? And one of the tests we use is this Nakajima test. And in this case, we form the materials we cut the material into these kind of shapes with different widths here, you see here. And we try to form it in this equipment here, and we have these cameras as you see. If you remember, I showed you an image which was through these cameras, and it tracks the strains induced in the material based on the speckle pattern here. And what you see here, just pay attention to that, forget about all those things. For the case when I have the width of 50 millimeters, this is the width, then I have a crack along this direction. For the similar material with a higher width of 150 millimeter, my crack direction has completely changed. You see, that's what you see. And now they are confused, well, how I'm gonna simulate that or predict that, because in reality it can fail because of any reason or whatever. So they came to us and they said, okay, how I can predict this kind of failure in my model. So I will come back to that, how we can model it. But what else you can get? This is the image you can get, as I told you before, evolution of a strain. You can get the fracture points. These points mean if you go above these strains, where these are strains, okay? So major strain and minor strains. And if you are above these points, this means it's gonna fail. Below this, it's not gonna fail. So this gives you...
Dr. Amir Siddiqui, if I could interrupt you.
Yeah, sure.
We have a question, if you don't mind. So
yeah.
The question is that how can computer determine the actual structure of a material? So can it determine what will happen when the shape is deformed? So they are trying to ask whether, what exactly is how the algorithm is determining the structure.
Okay, so in the computer, again, I haven't started that thing yet, but I will explain to you in few more slides. Okay, so I'm still on the experimental part, and this is more from experimental side. You can see here, you can only get surface information because you have cameras. They can only give you a surface information. If you want to see inside the material during the experiments, then you can use, for example, X-ray tomography. And in that case, you can also see inside the material what sort of structure is there and what is happening inside the material, right? But from computer simulation point of view, I will come back to that once I start discussing about the simulations. Okay, so that's what the information we had at macro scale, right? Some people will say, okay, no, I need to look at the microstructure as well. What is happening at a micro scale, which means at a scale which is below my eye, the resolution of my eye. So I need to take it to some kind of microscope, and that also answered that question which was just asked, that I will take it to a scanning electron microscope, which has a resolution of millimeters and micrometers and nanometers. You can see this is a 2 micrometer resolution size. And you can see what sort of fracture surface is there, how the microstructure really looks like, and these are all few hundreds or tens of micrometers. So you can look in scanning electron microscope from the experimental perspective to look into the material itself as well. And this gives you a microstructure or a microscale behavior in real world, I would say. So in this case, what you see is it's a void growth. When you have dimples on the fracture surface, the first thing is it's a ductile failure in the metal, and this means you had a void nucleation which grow and then they coalesce to form a bigger defect, and your material at the end of the day fails. So we started to understand by these tests that okay, how the high strength aluminum alloy really works. So now the question was, after all these experiments, are we able to identify out of these 10 mechanisms which one is active? So in this case, we identified that obviously every material will always start with elastic deformation. Then we had a slip based deformation based on our micro scale studies. And then we also found out that there were micro defects which were playing a role in the fracture. And also there is an effect as the crystal orientation effect in this diagram here. So now we need to incorporate these 4 of the mechanisms in our computational model. Okay. And now I'm going towards that direction where I would explain how we monitor the structure of the material inside the computer or in our tools, softwares. So the first thing I would do, I would go and I would say, okay, what are the commercial tools available for me, right? If I'm working in the industry, why should I make a new software if there is already a software available for me? So I will go and I will see, okay, if there is a void growth, if there is a plasticity, slip-based plasticity, I can use the J2-based plasticity models, and many finite element softwares like ANSYS, Abacus, all these have these models. So there is no problem with that. The problem comes in when you see that you have micro defect based deformation, because then you violate, because J2 plasticity is based on the assumption that volume constancy of the yield function is always preserved, which is not the case when you have defects or any other foreign particles. So we need to modify that. So we again then go into the scientific literature and we see, okay, what is done in this area. And we found out that there are people who have worked on the porous materials, and they have some kind of equation which accounts for the volume constancy issue, right? And they have a void growth part here, as you see in this equation. So what we did was we developed a model. We extended this model because this was only growth part, and we said that okay, we should have a growth part and we should have a coalescence part as well to complete the whole deformation mechanism, that is elastic deformation, then the plastic deformation, then the nucleation and growth part, and finally the coalescence part. So now we have those set of equations which are coming from the basic mechanics, right, or continuum mechanics, I would say, and then we implement these equations in the computer. Again, I'm trying to simplify it, and then we try to do simulation. So we went back and we did the simulation, and this is the experimental result of a tensile test of an aluminum material. And you can see the fracture starts at the center of the sample and then it propagates outside, right? So this is an X-ray image of that. And these are the computational model, and this is an axisymmetric model. So you see again here, it starts from, this is the center line. So we are only modeling the half of it in simple terms. So the fracture starts from the center, as you see here in all these cases, and it propagates in this direction, as you see here, and then it merges with the fracture coming from the surface. And that's what you see here. It starts from the center, it goes out, and then it merges with the crack coming from the outside, which is due to the deviatoric part of the plasticity, while the center one is basically due to the volumetric part, which was not there, and we implemented that in the model, and now model is complete and it is able to predict the realistic fracture. Then people said, okay, no, this is macro scale behavior, we want to go further and down the scale, and we want to see what happens if there is a microstructure effect there. So then you go and you develop a microstructure based model, right? Again, I am not showing you all the equations. It's already more than half past 5 or maybe 6 o'clock there. And I normally say that if you, well, some of my mentors used to say that if you show one equation to your audiences in the morning, you're going to lose 2 of your audiences. And if you show one equation in the afternoon, you will lose 4 of your audiences. Okay, so I don't want to take that chance. So I have tried to minimize the equations as much as I can. So I'm just showing you the main equations here, just to give you some flavor of mathematics. Otherwise, like there are slides of, I can fill all the slides with the equations. It's like hundreds of equations for each model. So in this case, again, I looked at the literature and I say, okay, how can I model the void growth in the single crystal or microstructure? I look at the literature, I find out, okay, this relationship is already there. I extend it to account for the void growth and coalescence part based on this relationship. I modify everything and I come up with this kind of equations. Again, I'm not showing you any derivations here. Just assume these are correct. If you have any question, you can get back to the paper, which I have referred somewhere in this presentation as well. So the only thing you have to see is this is all mathematical. These are all mathematical equations, and there are a number of parameters involved. This is a parameter, right? beta dot g is defined by this equation, and these are all parameters 1 2 3 4, okay, 5 6 7, almost 7 or 8 parameters are only on this equation. So now imagine if you are doing a simulation, how are you going to find these parameters for different materials? If I change a material from aluminum to something else, I need to identify these materials for each new material in a way. So again, think from in your mind, how can I do that? And this is one of the main question asked for such kind of mechanistic model, that how can I reduce the number of parameters and how I can identify these parameters. Okay, so anyways, just to simplify these things, we implement this again in the computer model, we develop our own codes, and then we try to simulate that. And again, I have shown you this. So this is the first of the case. You remember the crack was in this direction, while in this case the crack direction has changed. If you remember, I showed you that. So you see, we were able to predict that in this case the crack is going in this direction for this model, while in this case the crack direction has changed here. Okay, so we were able to that. Again, going back to that question, for the previous model, you can see that was based on the macro scale model. So this one was based on the macro scale model. So you can always see the material state, whether you are interested in the defect part of the system, how many defects are there, what sort of plastic strains are there in the material, how many voids are coalescing. So you have all the quantities defined in your mathematical equations, and that provides you all the mathematical or real-time information about the material at macro scale or micro scale, I would say. In this case, for such kind of model, the advantage is you can see the microstructure as well. So whatever you have got from microscope, you can basically take that data, you can make models using those EBSD maps. So these are real microstructure of a material, and then you can predict what is happening inside the microstructure. So you can also track material deformation at micro scale using these kind of models. So again, depending on the requirements of the industry or the research of the project, we can have different length scales, and at those length scale we can get different types of information from our models in the real time. In reality, for experimental parts, sometimes most of the time it's impossible to get in situ live data from experiments, and this is one of the main advantage of doing this kind of computational modeling, that you can get information at any instant of time in reality. Okay, for the parameter identification, I showed you there are so many parameters. What you do is you need to do V&V first. So you basically implement everything in a computer, then you do validation and verification. This means you identify those parameters based on some kind of token or basic test of the material. So in this case, let's say we did a uniaxial test. So this dotted line is basically the lines with these markers is basically the experimental curve, as you see here, while the dashed line is basically the simulation part. And you can see we basically start doing repeating the same test in our code or in the software, and we try to change these different set of parameters to get the best fit, and a set of parameter will give us some kind of best fit, and that's basically kind of a validation or verification of our model. And for the real life problem, then we will use the same set of parameters for those materials. So what we did was we use this parameter identification step for V&V thing, and then we predict the FLC behavior. So you remember in the second slide or third slide, I showed you this kind of curve, and that's called the forming limit curve for a material, right? This is very important curve for any sheet metal forming process, because this gives the experimentalist an indication that how much strain my material can really bear. So we were able to predict, you can see these dots are basically these triangular markers are our simulation, while these dots are experimental data, and we were able to fit that or predict that without doing any experiments in real world, or I would say only one experiment in this case here in simple runs. So again, this was for aluminum alloy 6082. Now I say, okay, I am now an expert, I have done a lot of work, let's try some other material. So I moved to titanium. So titanium is very complicated as well as compared to aluminum, because it can be dual phase material. As you can see here, its microstructure is not the same as you have seen before with nice grains. It has these needle shaped things as well, and you have alpha and beta phases there. So you have two different phases there in the material. So again, what you do, you will again take it to the lab, you do all those kind of tests and understand the physics behind it, and then you have to modify your models or equations which you have developed before, which we have done in this case as well. I haven't brought any equations here just to avoid any kind of dilemma, which I just discussed a few slides back. and you guys run away. So what I have shown you here is, again, we do a test, V and V first, identify the material parameters, and then we do a real life test, and you can see again, we can predict that for a dual phase titanium. Titanium 64 is a very complicated material, and it's used a lot in the aerospace industry. It has dual phase, and it requires a lot of equations, mathematical equations, which I haven't shown here, but you can again look at these papers here, which I have mentioned here, which gives all the details about that. So I am almost out of the time, most probably, but just to summarize, what we have been doing in the past is we are trying to understand the mechanics or physical mechanisms behind the deformation and failure of a material. We develop multi-scale computational frameworks, and we try to predict those using different models which are at different scales. So I gave you a flavor of macro scale and also micro and meso scale behavior as well. And again, high level thing is mechanics, equations, computer implementation, validation and verification, and then simulations to predict the behavior. What we are doing, the only problem, as I told you before, is to identify the material parameters. And as you increase the number of mechanisms, as you remember, I showed you 10 different mechanisms there. For each mechanism, there will be a large number of parameters. And to simulate any different material which has, let's say, 10 mechanisms, then it will be impossible to identify all those parameters, right? So what we are doing now is we are trying to move towards a data-driven computational frameworks where we don't have to fit any parameters. We don't have to really use any validation and verification, but you directly provide all this information which we get from the experiments as a raw data to the model, and it automatically identifies all those things, and based on that it predicts the behavior. So again, we are working on that. This I have just given one of this paper, recent paper of mine. It's still in press, so you can have a look at that, which is data-driven finite element methods. So it doesn't require any constitutive equation or material modeling equations, which I just showed you before, and it doesn't require any kind of material parameter identification. So I hope I am on time, most probably, or maybe earlier. I would just acknowledge that the work about metal forming, sheet metal forming, I have showed you today was a collaboration between all these people. So I would definitely acknowledge all of those. So Dr. Grieb Bhaskar from Advanced Forming Research Center, Hassan and Jack from University of Sheffield, Panos from Warwick Manufacturing Group, and then all the microscopy was done at University of Aberdeen, which I have showed you today. Umair from Texas A&M, Eugene is from Apache Corporation, and Professor Meeking from California, UC California, Santa Barbara. So yeah, so this is pretty much it, what I wanted to say. I hope you get a flavor of it, that you understand the physics, you transform those physics into some kind of equations, and then you try to develop computational model for that. So now I'm open for any questions you might have.
So thank you, Dr. Amir. So we do have a few questions.
Yeah.
So starting from Zen, who said that some bits to answer this question. So how do these simulations differ from the simulations in more accessible and less customized software like Fusion 360? So first of all, maybe so to talk about the simulations, having to see what exactly how you're building the simulations. The other question is about when it comes to computer modeling, is it a graphical based modeling, or how are you building the models when you're trying to estimate the parameters?
All right. Okay. So the first question is how our models are different than the commercial codes which are already available. And I gave you an example for that. If you go back, if I can go back to that slide here, somewhere here. So you remember I told you we understood the physics of the problem, and then we go and we will check the industry in commercial software. So let's say I went to an FE, any finite element software like ANSYS or Abacus, and I will say, okay, what sort of models are available there? And you will find out in majority of the FE softwares, J2 plasticity model is always there. It's a basic model for plasticity. The problem with that is it assumes that the the yield function is constant, and it doesn't depend on the volumetric part of the plastic strains. But when you have defects and voids in the material, then you have this condition violated, right? And then, so what we will do then, okay, this means that this kind of thing is not available in Abacus or ANSYS or any kind of finite element based software at that time. Now it's available. So we said, okay, now we go look into the literature, what people are working on, and then we found out, okay, some people have extended, so this is the J2 plasticity equation, have extended it to account for the volumetric growth part of the voids which was there, right? So they have implemented that in their own codes, right? Again, they write a lot of codes, there are many. So this was from Caltech, from Professor Michael Ortiz group. So again, in that case, so they had this equation there, but again, they were missing the point that voids will start to grow and then they will coalesce and they will fail, as you see here. So we basically said, okay, this part is there, so we can implement that, but then we need to have a coalescence part as well. And we expanded that, and then we implemented it in our code, and we were able to predict this kind of behavior, which was not possible using previous codes or commercial codes. So this is how we do. So we don't repeat the same thing. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We basically want to do something new and fill the gap of knowledge, whichever is missing. So that's how it works. The second question was about, sorry, I forgot. It's about,
so it was about using a graphical method of modeling.
Yeah. So in this case, there are so this is all based on FE, finite element based modeling, right? So if you're familiar with finite element based modeling, there are 3 steps behind it. One is called the pre-processing step. The second step is called the solver step, and the third step is called the post-processing step. Pre-processing step is the step where you define what is the geometry you are looking into, what sort of material is there, what are the loading and boundary conditions which you want to apply, etc. So all these things are there. This we can do both graphically as well as using our text editors. And for solver, obviously it's a background solver, so you just submit the job, it goes to your HPC, and it is computed based on the memory and whatever is required. It goes to a certain node and then it runs. Once it's finished, then you have a result file, and that result file you can see visually. So you can open the result file in the post-processing aid, and then you can see how does the stresses look like in your component. So you can see the whole geometry of the component as I showed you here. So these are all from FE software, right? So you can see the theta p, which is again volumetric part, this is a deviatoric part, this is the void coalescence part. So you can see these colorful maps, you can see even how this deformation is happening. This is all from the post-processing results. So these are all post-processing stuff. So we have combination of both, but mostly it's all visual now, so we use CAE sort of systems.
So I do have a question. So I was very intrigued when you said that because of the large parameter space, and now you are taking a more data-driven approach.
Yeah.
And I know that in other forms, other areas of modeling, so I also am part of that community of modeling, people are now using deep learning and other machine learning techniques to learn the parameters. So in order to reduce the parameter space, because obviously, you know, for any complicated model, as you just said, the space is too large. So what exactly how's the direction in your field? Is it going in that direction where people are employing these machine learning techniques to actually learn the model?
Absolutely, absolutely. So this was the idea of this work as well. So if you look at the current state of the art, for example, in this paper, what we did was we constructed a data-driven finite element method, which was basically targeting the biomaterials, right? So if you look at the paper, you will find out that we give experimental data points to the model, and then it uses a data minimization scheme, and it tries to identify and makes a decision of the right parameter, and then it runs the simulation as the data points evolve. So it's based on that. So this is one of the approach, but in this case, it was okay because you are working at the same length scale. So you're getting the data which is at the macro scale, and you're trying to simulate or predict which is at the same scale. The problem comes in when you have data which is available at a different scale. So for example, if I have to model this, but I have a data for macro scale, which could be stress strain, then I don't know how I'm going to fit the parameters for this, right? Or how I'm going to evolve the deformation behavior at this scale, because I only have the data for macro scale. I haven't done any test on this. I haven't taken it to microstructure. So in those cases, we are trying different types of approaches like symbolic regression, artificial neural networks, you know, all these kind of approach, surrogate modeling. So we are trying all these kind of different things and trying to come up with some kind of unified approach which can best give us this kind of behavior, especially bridging different length scales. It's a big problem there. So yes, people are using all these machine learning and deep learning algorithms as well. If you look at a recent paper from a group in Ohio State University, they are working on a microstructure based model, and in this case they have used I think forest something method algorithm. I'm not really familiar with that, and they have reduced the crystal plasticity order. So they take the texture of the microstructure and they try to train their model, and then they try to predict the behavior as well based on the training. So yes, this is the direction which people are going in, and it's just for us, it will be useful because then we will require minimum of user intervention, because a lot of parameters means sometimes you don't have a non-unique solution. Well, sometimes you have a non-unique solution, and this means you can't really justify in a physical way why you're using these set of parameters. So for those kind of problems, we can use parameter-free models. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very intriguing because so I'm not an expert obviously in materials, but I can see that the different configurations of the crystal structure can lead to the same or similar macroscale predictions. So you want to know exactly which configuration might be the best, and I think that that will probably be very useful. I have one question which is very interesting. It's about your own career, and they say that they are curious about what got you into this field, and then how did you end up as what was the motivation and driving factor behind your interest in this domain?
Yeah, so well, when I was since these are all first year students, so they might be thinking about what directions to take. When I was a student, or when you will be a student, you will be learning or studying a lot of subjects, right? And in my case, I did my undergraduate from NED University, so I was basically doing a BE in mechanical engineering. So at that time, let's say we had 40 subjects in 4 years. Some teachers are very good, some are like me, crap. So sometimes you understand a lot of good things or learn a good things from different teachers, and you start liking that subject, right? Because you are taught in a way that you understand and you are motivated towards that. While in some cases you don't like it because you are not taught properly, or the way that it was taught, you might not be ready for that. I'm not saying everybody is bad, but everybody has a different requirement of learning as well. So what happened was, in my case, when I was studying, I got some excellent teachers in, let's say, heat transfer and thermodynamics and fluid mechanics, and I was always trying to go in that direction. While solid mechanics, this is all solid mechanics and mechanics of materials, was the weakest part because we didn't get that kind of teacher which can motivate us. So I said, okay, I'm gonna go in that direction. Most of us were going in that direction, but then somebody told me that first start working in the industry, so have at least 1 or 2 years of experience, and once you have worked in the industry, you will know which area interests you more, because practical life is very different what you see in the academia or university. So my direction was going in one of those fluid mechanics or thermodynamics related area. But then when I started working in a manufacturing industry, and then I was working in the design and development, I found it more intriguing to work on the structure side of things. And for that, I went to Germany, and then I started doing computational mechanics of materials and structures. So I did my master's in this area, and then I was offered a PhD position there in Max Planck Institute in Germany. So I started doing PhD in computational modeling of materials, because Max Planck is famous for materials research all around the world. So I was there for like 3 years, and obviously that changed me or molded me in this direction. So since then, I have been working in this area. But this is not the area I'm working in. I mean, I just brought this research, but if you look at my group's page, then you will find a lot of other areas we are working on as well.
Right. So thank you, Dr. Amir. I'd like to thank all of you who have participated. Let's give an applause to Dr. Amir Siddiqui, our guest speaker. We can just clap it. We are right now in the high flex mode, so we are a few of us sitting in the hall, and the rest are joining us Zoom. So you know the situation is we are in right now. But thank you very much for your time, and I think it was a great motivation.
Okay.
And really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be part of this, and if I can be of any help in future, more than happy to contribute in a way. I always feel happy to help anyone there, or a student community. And yeah, we are also in the same situation here. We are still working from home. We're not allowed to go to campus yet, and we are still doing a lot of risk assessment on this side of the world as well. So it's a different world now for all of us, and we have to live with that. So thank you very much again, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope you guys got something out of it. Okay.